Welcome to the Victorian Parent Council VPC Parent Podcast Series. VPC is a registered charity organisation dedicated to everyone who support parents in educating their children. I'm Jackie Vanderveld, your host today. Our guest today is Ruth Fordyce. Ruth is a registered psychologist at the Resilience Centre in Epping in Sydney. She has many years of experience working with adolescents and primary-aged children and their families, and her particular area of interest is ways of building up resilience to deal with issues like anxiety, bullying, social skills, self-esteem, depression and family dynamics. Welcome, Ruth.
Thanks so much, Jackie. It's great to be here.
Ruth, what is anxiety? What is normal and what is abnormal?
So anxiety is one of the core emotions that all humans experience. It's actually a helpful emotion in many ways. It cues us into situations that can be risky or dangerous for us to get us to a safer place. But it's also quite a helpful emotion when we realise that we've got a goal that we want to work towards and we've got a chance that we might not reach it. So, for example, if we were to suddenly realise, I've got a deadline coming up in a few days that I totally forgot about, I've got a piece of work that I've got to complete, that's very normal. We're going to feel anxious about that, and that's a helpful emotion in motivating us, in helping us realise there's something important to me that I'm possibly not going to achieve. I need to put in some energy and some effort to get that thing done. So sometimes people find anxiety has a lot of energy associated with it, that sort of nervous energy, and that energy can actually be really helpful if we can channel it into actually working towards achieving the goal that's important to us. So now that question about, what's normal and what's abnormal, that's a really great question. I think of anxiety as very much a spectrum. So we might hear those labels normal and abnormal, and that makes us think, well, there's two categories. Am I normal or am I abnormal? But if you think of anxiety as actually like a spectrum, where at one end we've got a very, very calm person who really is calm about most things in their life most of the time. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have someone who's really anxious. So they're very anxious about most things in their life most of the time. We all fall somewhere on that spectrum. And so I like to help people think about whether their anxiety levels are manageable or whether they're starting to be disruptive and starting to interfere with their daily life and whether they can achieve their goals in life. So people are all going to experience anxiety at some times, some points in their life, but for many people it's a manageable level. They feel a bit worried about certain things, but like I said before, that might actually motivate them to do something about those things, or they just learn to push through that. It's quite manageable. Whereas what we can see as we go a bit further up the spectrum is that some people start to find that their anxiety levels are actually interfering with daily life. So maybe to give a couple of examples of how that might look, in children for parents. So a lot of children might find if they're feeling a bit worried about something, often it comes to mind at night. When you put them in bed, you think, that's it, we're done for the day, and then all of a sudden those little worries come bubbling out about what's been happening in the day or what's on the next day. Now, that's quite common, and a lot of kids might find that, that happens occasionally, and that having a bit of a chat with mum or dad about it, talking it through, and then they're able to unwind and go to sleep. Whereas for some kids, you might notice that is starting to happen nearly every night. So that's starting to become disruptive because it's really hard to unwind and get to sleep. Or it might be that chat might go on, or they might be lying there tossing and turning and it's an hour or two before they can get to sleep. So you can see the difference there, that's really becoming quite disruptive and unhelpful because they're not going to get enough sleep. Another example might be that, it's quite common for most children to have days when something's coming up at school that day they're feeling worried about, and so there might be those preschool jitters. They're talking about nerves in the tummy. They might even say they're feeling a bit sick, but your sense is actually they're a bit nervous about what's going to happen. And again, that might only happen occasionally. You might be able to talk them through it, say you're going to be okay, get them, a little bit motivated, and they take a deep breath and in they go and they do it, even though they're feeling a bit nervous. Other kids...
And that's entirely normal.
Absolutely. And we all have to experience that feeling of being nervous but saying, okay, I've got to get in there and get through it. I'll be okay even though it's going to be hard. again, moving further up the spectrum, we're going to see some children who find that happens more and more for them.
Right.
So it might be that actually becomes quite a common experience, that they're extremely nervous before most days of school, and up to the point where sometimes parents are finding their child is so distraught they're refusing. They don't want to go. They don't want to separate, at the school gate and all that sort of stuff. So again, that's where it's starting to become disruptive, because that's really distressing for both parent and child of how to actually get them to school and get them participating in their day.
Okay. So over the test period for NAPLAN, because
yes,
they would be aware there's a lot of, some preparation going on in the lead up. The teachers would be doing perhaps some test samples with them to get them used to that process. There'd be talk about the NAPLAN tests and the days that it's on. It's not going to be a normal timetable day. It's going to be different. So we would expect to see our children being a little more anxious on these days. Okay.
Absolutely.
Right. So that's
particularly, yes, that's right. That is normal, because particularly for those younger children, I mean, you're thinking of the year threes who've never done this before.
Right.
All of us, including us as adults, when we're approaching something that we've never experienced before, and we're aware that there is a sense in which people want us to do well in it.
Yes.
So it's unknown to me, but I'm being told that, it would be really good if I could do well in this. The more that pressure is increased, the more likely children are to feel anxious, because there's a bit of uncertainty around, will I have what it takes? I don't even know what this testing is like. I've never done it before, but I know people want me to do well on it if I can. So that's very normal, and that's something to keep in mind for the parents of the youngest ones in the year three sort of age group, is just helping kids understand that everyone feels nervous when we're doing something we've never done before for the first time, and it's a matter of just finding out what it's like and giving it a go and having your best shot at it, and that you'll actually learn some information for the next time. With your older kids, you've got the opposite situation, which is some of them will be nervous because they've done it before and they knew that, they found things about it hard and so on. But yeah, so there's a little bit of a mix there. But yeah, you're right. Sometimes all the talk surrounding it can make children feel more anxious.
So Ruth, knowing that we've got 4 year groups that do this, and of course children change from their year 3, 8-year-old, 9-year-old self, and then they become the 10 and 12-year-old self, and the 12 and 13-year-old self, and then the 14 and 15-year-old. What can parents do to assist with that period of time, the lead up and the actual exam, the NAPLAN test period? What can parents do to assist with children who might be feeling a little bit more anxious, which we've established is normal? What can they do to assist that smooth passage through this period of time?
Yeah. Okay, lots of ideas. And as I talk through them, I'll mention a few places that people can look to get a bit more information too. But firstly, I think whenever we're thinking about our children's anxiety, it's really important for parents to think about how their own anxiety levels are going. Anxiety tends to run in families. It's related to our temperament. And a lot of parents will find, if they look honestly inside themselves, that they might have been quite similar as a child, and that they, in fact, might find they still get a bit anxious sometimes. And so part of what will be going on is parents sometimes having their own anxiety around their child doing NAPLAN, and what's that going to mean, and if their child does well or doesn't do well, what does that mean about them as a parent, and so on. And again, all of that's really normal. Lots of parents experience that anxiety about how their child is performing. But I think it's just really helpful to be mindful of that and to really check in, because one of the things that we want to do for our children when they're feeling a bit anxious is we want to be able to model coping and calm. So even if we're feeling our own anxiety, making sure that we're finding ways to manage that and to be a calm presence for our children is really helpful. And in fact, it's okay to talk to your kids about what you do when you're anxious. It's really helpful for kids to know that sometimes you get a bit worried and you might imagine things are going to go badly, but you remind yourself of the fact that you have done these things before and you take some deep breaths and you get in there and do it, and then you discover it wasn't as bad as you thought it was going to be. That sort of narrative is really helpful for kids to get a window into. But obviously that implies, by saying that, I'm implying that a parent has done that. They have worked on those strategies and they know how to coach themselves through anxious moments. So if parents are listening to this and thinking, oh, I'm not very good at coaching myself through anxious moments, I just tend to avoid them, then that's something parents can actually work on for themselves. Say, okay, I need to step up a little bit too in my skills of working through anxiety, and then I can help teach that to my kids. So that's an important one, I think, to be aware of. Self-check. How am I going? Am I feeling anxious about my child doing NAPLAN? How can I coach myself through that a bit? Secondly, I just quickly want to talk about some really basic building blocks that parents are probably really aware of, but I think it's worth being mindful of these, is that anxiety has quite a bodily component. So its symptoms are quite physical. And so things like getting enough rest, getting outside and getting exercise and fresh air, allowing the brain to actually have a break from all that cognitive, mental sort of thinking that kids are doing at school, and anxious kids in particular are very in their head. They're thinking all the time. So making sure that they get outside, that they have a bit of a break, that they have some fun activities or hobbies or sports that they do is really helpful just for managing some of those physical symptoms. And the other thing that can be really worthwhile for parents to have a look at is if they're finding they've got a little one who really gets quite physically stressed, or a teenager where they're seeing quite signs of physical stress, is being aware of things like relaxation and yoga and mindfulness, meditation, all these sorts of activities that are now very well known and very well researched as tools that really help us manage anxiety and stress. And a couple that I'll mention, and we can put some links to these, Jackie, so that people can go and find them. For example, if you want something fun for your younger kids to go and have a look at, there's a YouTube channel called Cosmic Yoga that is aimed completely at children. That's lots of fun, but it's teaching kids how to do yoga. So really helpful to get them into their body. And she's got some good little sort of relaxation and meditation tools on there as well. And another app that's becoming really well known in Australia, a lot of schools are promoting it, is Smiling Mind, which is a mindfulness meditation app, and they've got different age categories in there as well, so would span all of the age categories that we're talking about at the moment. And I find that can be a really helpful one for teenagers to be able to download on their phone, and it's something they can listen to if they need to unwind a little bit as they're going to sleep at night, maybe on the bus, on the way to school or the train, just having something that they can do that helps them to get out of that cycle of the anxious thinking and focusing on their breathing and things they can do to relax their physical state a little bit more. So that's sort of the physical side of anxiety and things that can help with that. But obviously I really want to talk a little bit more about the sort of the mental or cognitive side of anxiety as well, which is all of that thinking, those worries and anxious thoughts that parents will be really familiar with that's going on in their child. So a few things that can help with that. One of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit today, again, parents might have come across this because it's sort of growing in the education sort of space, is Carol Dweck's work in helping us identify whether children have more of a growth mindset or more of a fixed mindset. So I'm sure, Jackie, you're really familiar with this work. Yes. Lots of schools picking up on this, and I think a lot of parents are starting to realise how useful this is in terms of helping their child approaching their schooling. So what on earth is a growth mindset and a fixed mindset? So Carol Dweck is interested in what beliefs young people are developing about learning and about their abilities and their intelligence. And so what she found in her research was that some young people were developing a more fixed kind of mindset to their learning. And what she found was a fixed mindset was that kind of belief that you either have it or you don't. Either I'm smart or I'm dumb. Either I'm going to succeed in this test or I'm going to fail. So that sort of black and white kind of thinking where I see my capacities as fixed. Now, those kids, straight away you can see, those kids are going to be much more anxious about testing because the testing is going to reveal to me whether I've got it or I don't. And there's not much optimism about what I do if I haven't done very well on the test. Now, the opposite to that is a growth mindset. And what Carol Dweck identified here was the type of person that approaches learning as a process, and they see intelligence and capabilities as something that can be improved upon, and hence the title growth mindset. That my mindset is that my life is about growing and learning and improving. And so each opportunity that I face is going to give me useful information. Sometimes I'm going to do well in an assignment or a test, and that will be useful information to me about what I know. And sometimes I'm going to make mistakes. Sometimes I'm going to do badly on a test, and that will also be useful information because it will tell me in what ways I can grow further. And so that person will approach testing quite differently. So I think what parents can really do is have a bit of a think about what they see emerging in their child. And many of us are mixed, I should say too, Jackie, that we don't all have fixed mindsets about everything in our life. So the parents might be even noticing, oh, my child actually has a real growth mindset when it comes to playing soccer, but they have a really fixed mindset about their maths. And they just say, oh, I'm terrible at maths, I hate it.
Yes. And at different times in life too.
Yes. Yeah, through different experiences. The other thing that can happen is sometimes the experience of a different teacher can help children to break out of a fixed mindset, because a teacher has that capacity to get them to see that there is opportunity for growth, that they can improve. And a teacher who's really good at giving that kind of feedback can often help foster a change in mindset in a child. But parents can be really involved in this as well. So parents can have a bit of a think about how they talk to their child about their learning and their capabilities. And one of the things that we can do is really commend effort. Notice effort that is put in, not just commending a result.
Okay.
So actually looking at how the child might have worked towards the goal, what things they did that were helpful, picking up on where there's been any improvement. And one of the things that can happen with parents is that if we have a child who's not doing so well in a subject and we want them to be really achieving a lot better, we might have in our mind the mark that we want them to get to. But any improvement along the way is still a success that we can celebrate, and we can get that child to reflect on how were you able to do that? What things helped you improve just a little bit? You know, you might have been able to go up a reading level in your home readers, or you might have been able to suddenly master a skill in maths that you couldn't do before. Everything else in maths may still be a challenge, but hey, you finally got that bit. How did you do that? Let's look at that and see that there's been improvement. And that really helps build that growth mindset about believing that you can actually improve with effort. And the other really important element of this that parents can do is really encourage kids that making mistakes is normal. So a lot of anxious kids, one of the things they really fear is the feeling that I will fail. And often what comes with that is the feeling that I'll be disappointed with myself or other people will be disappointed. So a lot of anxious kids leading up to NAPLAN will have this thought in their mind that either my teacher or mum and dad will be disappointed with me in how I perform.
Is that related to perfectionism, or is that also it is, or is it, and can it be something else all on its own as well?
There is a bit of a connection, I think, between that sort of fixed mindset and being perfectionist, absolutely, because it's that sense of for a perfectionist, if I don't get it perfect, then it's the other category, not good enough, rather than that sense of being able to see that I'm working towards something. Improvement is a great thing. I might not be all the way there yet, but I've actually learned and made progress and made improvement. If I'm heading towards my goal, I'm going in the right direction, and I can keep gathering more information with each experience to get me where I want to go.
So parents are really in a unique position in their relationship with their children to recognise those gains that may not be obvious to a teacher necessarily,
Absolutely.
or someone else.
And I think also parents, we're the ones who are often there with kids in that vulnerable moment when they realise I haven't done as well on something as I wanted to, or I've made a mistake, or I've failed a test, and they're dealing with that feeling of perhaps being disappointed in themselves and worried that someone else is disappointed in them. And I think we have incredible power in that moment to talk to our kids about the fact that failure and making mistakes is really normal. It's part of the human experience. It's just what we do with it that matters. If we use it as a learning opportunity and we say, well, what can we learn from that? How do we make it better? I think just a funny little analogy that can illustrate that, Jackie. The last time I went to IKEA, you know, the furniture shop IKEA, and they have signs up about, they had the testing they do with their furniture. And I was looking at this sign they had of this thing that was a machine where it pounds up and down on the armchair, you know, 1,000 times to make sure that, you know, the equivalent of my toddler jumping on the armchair, you know, it'll be safe. And I was thinking about, isn't that interesting, the use of the word testing? You know, when we test a piece of furniture, when we test a new product that someone has made, what is the purpose of that testing? You know, we don't expect that testing will render that product to be perfect the first time around. The whole point of that testing is to say, this product is new, we think it's probably going to have some flaws and some issues, and we'll need to work out what they are. So we'll test it and we'll get really useful feedback from that, and then we'll tweak the design and we'll modify it and we'll gradually keep working on getting better and better and better. So I think sometimes that's a really helpful reframe for kids. When they hear testing, if they're coming in that fixed mindset, they're going to think, oh my goodness, this test is going to reveal whether I'm good enough or not. So I think if we can promote that kind of growth mindset, it's about saying, hey, this test is just going to give you some really valuable information about where you might already be strong and areas where you might want to grow. And that's really normal. We all have areas where we need to grow. So that's really great to find out that information and be able to keep working on that.
Of course, and I think that's really at the heart of NAPLAN, is that it is a diagnostic test. That's what it's for. It's there to highlight the areas where students are doing well and meeting standard, and assisting and informing where some additional assistance might be needed. So I think that's really important to keep that in mind. It works in beautifully with everything that you've been telling us so far.
Yeah. And I think, again, you know, coming back to parents who can share a little bit of their own experiences with their kids, I think being able to demonstrate to your children that you're willing to do things where sometimes you might make mistakes. And I think particularly just thinking about, you know, the moving into the realm of your teenagers where you've got year 7 and year 9 students, I often say to parents, I think it's really great to do an activity with your kids that they're better at than you are, which may well be, might be playing the computer games with them, actually jumping in there and saying, let me play that with you. Or it might be that they've got a hobby that you're not really that great at. You know, by the time they're in year 7 or year 9, they might actually be playing a sport, you know, reasonably well, or maybe it's, surfing or whatever it might be. But getting in there and having a crack at something and showing your kid, I'm not afraid to be in that space where I don't really know what I'm doing, I'm making mistakes and I'm trying to learn. And even it can be great if it's something that they are better at than you, that they can teach you, and you can show them in practical terms what that looks like to have that growth mindset, to say, hey, I didn't fall off that time. I'm still not really surfing, but I stood up, you know, or to say to them, I have no idea what I'm doing in this game, but I'm going to give it a go. And just showing them that you're okay with that. You know, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to learn.
And to be vulnerable in that space.
That's right. That's right. And for them to see that, you know, often we only learn by getting the feedback of what's not working as well as what is working. Again, just a few thoughts on, you know, wanting to not just, you know, counter anxiety, but what actually helps foster confidence to sort of flip that anxiety around a little bit. For the children who have had a little bit of experience with NAPLAN or just with testing in general, you know, when something's coming up that they're feeling anxious about, often it's really helpful to get kids to reflect on past experiences and get them to think about, well, you've done testing before, you know, even if it's, you know, you do spelling tests in class, you do, you know, the teachers are giving them those sorts of little tests all the time. Get them to have a think about what's worked for them. So what's actually worked for you? What have you noticed helps you to do better on a test? And it might be thinking about before the test, leading up to it, and maybe even during tests. What have you noticed works for you? What helps you to do better on a test? And what hasn't worked? and that, again, it's feeding that growth mindset, but just helping them start to get a little bit of confidence around knowing themselves and knowing that simple things like, I actually made enough time to study, that made a difference. And when I didn't make enough time to study, that didn't really work for me. That seems obvious to us, but sometimes kids actually need to reflect on that and work that out for themselves, of what works for them, actually getting them to think about, what things help them concentrate during a testing period. But I think the more we can get them to work that out for themselves, the better. We often want to give advice about what should help, make sure you go to bed early and all that sort of stuff. But actually I find my kids are much more motivated if they've worked out for themselves what works and what doesn't.
Fantastic.
The other thing I thought I might just comment on quickly, Jackie, if that's okay, is if parents are aware that they really have a particularly worried child, that one, I was mentioning that example of the child who's awake at night and turning things over in their head, some strategies for that. And that might be the sort of child where parents might realise a bit of external help might be helpful, going to see a psychologist or even just chatting with the school counsellor. But for that child who you find is up late at night wanting to talk with you about all of their worries, a couple of thoughts on that. Firstly, I would encourage those families to make sure that there's a time for that child to have a think about what they're worried about earlier in the day. So rather than it all coming out at bedtime, carve out some time somewhere before the wind down routine. So before the brushing the teeth and the jammies and, whatever it is, whether they get to read in bed for a little while or whether they listen to some music or whatever it might be, before the wind down, make sure somewhere in their day or their afternoon, early evening, there's an opportunity for them to actually think about, what am I worried about? Am I worrying at the moment? What is it that's going through my mind? And depending on the child, some children will find it much more helpful to talk it out. So they'll want to seek you out or another important person in their life. For other children, it actually can be extremely helpful for them to write it down.
Interesting.
For some kids, it'll be a bit of both. Okay. But for them to have an opportunity to get a little bit of that stuff out of their head before they're trying to go to sleep. And what you can then do is help them sift through a little bit of what those thoughts are, whether there is something that they can action to help them solve that worry. And often for kids, then they can wind down and go to sleep much better if they know that, okay, here's something I can action about that and we're going to get onto that tomorrow. And now this is my time where I actually need to wind down and sleep, because sleep is also important to help me solve that worry. I need to be well rested enough so that tomorrow when we're going to take action about that, I've got enough energy in the tank. But sometimes kids are lying awake worried because there's something that's bugging them that they think, oh, what am I going to do about that? Moving that earlier in the day and helping them look at, okay, well, what is something that we could do that we could action about that? But sometimes they're worried about something that you're thinking, well, I don't know that is something we can necessarily action, or they're worrying about something that you think, I don't know that that's even necessarily going to come true. So if I give an example of that, you might be dealing with a child who's really actually quite bright, but they keep saying to you, I'm really worried I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail this test. I'm going to flunk out. I'm going to do really, really badly on my NAPLAN. I'm going to freeze up and I won't be able to, produce anything. And
I think I may have had nightmares about that.
Yes. I mean, it's actually quite common, that people have that fear that even though I've done pretty well, I've got this fear that I'm going to fail. So some really quick questions that parents can talk through with their child on that. And these are the sorts of things that I'll often do in a session, if I'm working with a child or working with a family, is to actually get them to think through, what's this worst case scenario that you've got going through your head? What are the chances of that actually happening? Let's look at the evidence. What's happened to you in the past? What are the chances of that actually happening? And the child's starting to get a bit of a sense where they've got to be a bit more flexible in their thinking. They've got to start thinking about, well, what else could happen? So you're really worried you're going to flunk out. Okay, what else could happen? You could do okay. You could do well. What are some of the different... Okay, what are the chances of each of those things, based on what like what the evidence has been so far. And you could actually get the kid to do, a little pie chart, and actually say, okay, what do you feel like are the chances of you doing okay? What are the chances of you doing well? What are the chances of you failing? Let's map it out. and see how much of their fear is actually matching up to reality, to what the evidence is. But I think one of the things we really often feel compelled to do, Jackie, is the child that's thinking, oh, but there is a chance I could fail. There's a chance, We want to often say to them, no, there isn't, you'll be fine. But actually that doesn't usually work.
No, it doesn't work.
Probably observed. And interestingly, what often actually is more helpful, and I'm often doing this in sessions with these kinds of kids, is saying, well, I don't think there's a big chance of that happening, because from what I can see, the evidence is, you've done okay in your tests before. You've told me you've never actually completely failed a test, so that's interesting. I get what you're saying, though. You feel still there's this fear that it could happen, that you could fail. So let's say it did. What if it actually happened? How would you get through that? How would you cope? What would we do if that were to actually happen? And amazingly enough, Jackie, what kids then start to have to do is to face the thing they're most afraid of and start to realise that even if that thing happened, they would survive. They would get through it. And I think this is a really good reflection point for parents as well. Again, we're coming back to how anxious is mum, how anxious is dad.
Mum and dad, that's
is
right.
that mum and dad need to face that reality too, that if that worst case scenario were to happen, would you actually be okay? Because if not, if you were to come down on your child like a ton of bricks, then they've got reason to be anxious. You're part of the problem. But actually, if you know that you would love your child no matter what, if you would still be incredibly proud that they got in there and had a crack at it, and if you would be willing to support them even if the teacher was disappointed with them, that's a really important conversation to have with that child, with that anxious child, to say, you know what, if the worst case happened, how would we get through it? We would as a family. We would navigate that with you. Yes, you would feel sad and you would feel disappointed, but that's okay. It wouldn't last forever. We would get through it. We would learn from it. And again, it links back to that growth mindset, doesn't it?
Right.
We would learn from this together of what would be more helpful for you next time so that doesn't happen again.
So if I'm reading this correctly from what you're saying, the fear of, it's almost fear of what the unknown would be around.
Yes. Yeah. And often in the psychology world, we'll talk about this kind of strategy as a coping ahead strategy.
Right.
So when you've got that kind of brain that tends to tick over to the worst case scenario, sometimes once it's popped into your head, it's hard to shake. And people want to mean well and say to you, oh, that'll never happen, it's okay. But sometimes for people who are anxious, it's actually more helpful to say, if my brain has already imagined up that worst case scenario, it's there now, why don't we practice coping ahead and say, well, what would you do? How would you get through that? Mm. And that really helps that alleviate that sense of panic around what if that were to happen? So, well, it's probably not a big chance that it's going to happen. But if it were to happen, this is what we would do to get through that. We would get there, we would work it through, and you will still be okay.
I've got to qualify too that, we've been talking in terms of failing and passing, but in actual fact, the NAPLAN is all around bands of performance.
Yes.
But we, as a society, we still sort of interpret, results as being...
Totally.
On that path.
Yeah, and a lot of the kids that I work with, there is that strong feeling that I failed because I didn't get into the band that I thought I should have, or that is, the average for my school, or, those sorts
all
of...
that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's right. But thank you for qualifying that, because, that's...
I just sort of want people listening to this and going, oh, my goodness, is there a fail point? No.
Yeah.
It's about the way in which we, interpret this, and of course, messages that we're then giving to our children or to the students in this case.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, a lot of the kids that I work with, just not getting the top band is that feeling of, oh, I didn't do well enough, that I feel like a failure. That sense of a failure that can come. But again, just teaching kids that at different times you won't hit the goal that you want and you feel disappointed. Of course you do, but that's a really normal human experience, and we have to learn how to get through that. And in fact, kids who are highly successful, some of the kids that I work with that end up going to selective schools, sometimes they haven't had enough experience of failure. So they're actually very anxious because they don't know how to cope with failure because they've never experienced it. So it's only like sort of when they hit year 11, year 12 that they're starting to realise, oh, I don't always get 100% anymore. And you think, wow, you haven't had that experience of getting a lower mark than what you hoped for. That's actually a really important experience to have in life because as an adult, if we want to go after goals that matter to us, there's a chance we won't hit them, and we need to be ready and resilient to be able to cope with that feeling of disappointment and say, oh, well, I've got to learn from this. What can I learn that's going to help me next time?
That's right.
Yeah.
So we've talked about some really specific things, which has been really useful for parents. And I know that in a previous conversation we talked about some big picture items that
yes.
to be aware of as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that is a bit of a passion of mine because I think when I think about, I'm a parent also, and when I think about kind of the culture and the climate where I live in Sydney and where, in a lot of the big cities of Australia, I'm starting to see, I think, a real issue for a lot of parents that we find ourselves feeling a bit anxious about our kids because we live in these sort of big, fast-paced cities where it's almost like we're becoming a bit competitive. There's this sense that there's a big population and it's busy and it's fast-paced and we want our kids to sort of fit in and be successful. And it's almost that sense of, I want my kids to be at the top of the heap, that I want them to do well and how do I make sure that they're succeeding and going okay. And I think that we can really amp up our own anxiety and therefore our children's anxiety when these sorts of markers come along, like NAPLAN, that can cue us into, oh, am I doing a good enough job? Is my kid going okay? Are they going to succeed in life and in the world? And I just wanted to say that I think it's really important for parents to take a step back and remember that there are many, many pathways to success. And children are all different. Not all of them are going to dazzle on something like NAPLAN, but they can be successful in so many different ways. Just something I think parents should be really mindful of when they find themselves getting drawn into that sort of competitive space, that actually can increase your own anxiety and therefore your child's anxiety and hamper their capacity to just focus on their own strengths, their own goals and the things that they're going to do well in life, which might be different to the next child. And one of the things I'm really aware of with that, Jackie, is social media. And you know what? We talk a lot about social media and our teenagers, but I actually just want to say that social media can be quite detrimental for parents too, I think, because a lot of parents are posting about their children's achievements and I'm so proud of Johnny because he did this and just the pain that can set off in terms of, oh, my goodness, is my kid doing okay? Am I doing a good enough job as a parent? And just being mindful of that, I think, is really helpful. Just not to buy into that, just to trust that there are many, many pathways to success and it is a process. And you're not going to see all of that unfolding within the first sorts of testing opportunities. You see that as a long-term process of seeing your child unfold in their capabilities and their strengths.
Absolutely. And I think what we're constantly losing sight of around NAPLAN is that NAPLAN is a diagnostic tool. It's there to show us what our children are doing well in as a particular standard and to highlight the areas that need more assistance. It's not a genius test, it's there as a diagnostic tool. How are our children tracking? Some literacy and numeracy standards and informing a way forward in terms of assisting them to get up to a standard. So I think with all of the league tables and the way in which unfortunately the NAPLAN results are being used, not area, but in other areas it's certainly given a bit of a different spin on it and probably adds to the hype.
And I think the other thing I'm conscious of is the pressure that then is created for schools and for teachers when parents are very results driven and really commenting on how children have performed in tests and so on, and sort of losing sight of that more holistic view of what education is all about. And I think that's something I'm also quite passionate about, is trying to encourage parents to be, supportive and encouraging of teachers and of the school community and the school climate, and really speaking into what they see that's working well for their children. Because, when do we make meetings to talk to the teachers? When there's a problem. That's what they get feedback about constantly. And the same with, NAPLAN, it's a really great tool to be able to tell us, hey, where are the areas where we can do better, where we can keep improving. I think that's great. But I think also as parents, we can be really helpful if we actually feedback what's working. Wouldn't that be amazing, Jackie, if we all took the time to write down a little note, hey, talk to your kids and say, tell me 3 things your teacher's doing that's actually helping you learn. What do you love about your teacher? What do they do well? What's actually helped you improve this year? Wouldn't that be amazing if we all actually wrote that down and gave it to the teachers at our schools?
As an ex-chalky, I would have loved that.
Because you just don't get that much, do you? That encouragement about, overall how your class is going. But, for my child in particular, this is what they've loved about you and what's really worked for them, and I think that kind of encouragement is just invaluable.
It is. To see that such a long way in just relationships.
And it's more than just results on a page, that education happens in that context of someone just noticing your child's abilities, encouraging them, helping them improve. And of course, there's so much more going on in the classroom than just the numeracy and the literacy as well. There's a whole raft of life skills and like we talked about before, mindsets even about learning that are being developed that our teachers are helping influence.
That's right.
So, yes, I'm quite passionate about that. We all need to encourage a teacher.
Yeah, we do. Ruth, so we're coming to the end of our conversation.
Yes.
But I think it would be really great if we could perhaps point to some resources that would be helpful for parents. So
absolutely.
A lot of issues here today,
a
lot of techniques, but I think maybe some point parents where they could go and have a look for some more information.
Yes, absolutely. So I mentioned before, the website, the yoga website and the Smiling Mind app, which we can put links for parents to go and have a look at. The other thing that we can do is link to a couple of things that we have online available through the practice where I work in Sydney, the Resilience Centre. There's a few things that we've done to try and resource parents that might be really helpful. For anyone who happens to be listening who's a local to us in Sydney, we're based in Epping and we actually run a group program specifically for 8 to 12-year-olds that really helps address anxiety and teaches optimistic thinking skills. That program's called Bright Thinking. So if anyone's local to us in Sydney and they want to check that out, they're very welcome to. But what we also developed to go along with that might be really useful for parents listening anywhere is a parenting equivalent to that. So there's an online hot topic that we have it's about an hour and 15 minutes, I think, in length. And I put that together just presenting to parents some tools of how to be aware of their own thinking, how to be more optimistic in their own thinking and how to skill their children up a little bit in that.
And that's a video, is it, Ruth?
Yes, it is. So people can register online for that and do that as an online video that they can access. The other one that we've got on our website at the Resilience Centre that might be really helpful for people to go and check out is my colleague Sarah Piper did one on emotion coaching, which is a really useful tool as well for parents who've got anxious or quite emotionally, well, really for any parent, but particularly those who are listening who are thinking, yep, I've got a little one who is quite emotionally sensitive and I need to help them a little bit with how to manage those feelings. There's lots of practical suggestions in there of how to help your child name those emotions, talk about what they're feeling, and then how to help them move into problem solving so that they can move out of the overwhelm of the emotion and then get into the problem solving. So they would be really worth checking out if parents are thinking they want to go and skill themselves up a little bit more. And then lastly, I think just that the work of Carol Dweck that we talked about, the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset, just going and having a bit of a look at her work. If people think that's really relevant, they want to help promote a growth mindset in their child, there's a lot of great resources that they can go and have a look at. But just reading a bit more about her work might be useful.
Wonderful. Ruth, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Ruth, I've got to declare, Ruth and I know each other in a professional capacity as well.
We do.
So we have quite regular discussions, but this has actually been a real treat for me because we don't often get to sit down and have these.
Depth, yes. That's right. Yeah, no, it's been absolutely lovely, and I hope that all the parents out there find something of use, not only for their kids, but also for managing their own anxiety.
That's wonderful, Ruth. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you to our guest speaker. We hope you enjoyed today's topic. Want to know more about this podcast and other VPC podcasts? Please visit the VPC website vicparentscouncil.vic.edu.au and leave a review. We would also welcome you to contact us if you would like to be our guest or if you have a topic around parenting and education. Thank you to Melbourne singer Emma Sidney for her permission to use her soundtrack, Cherish. Until next time, thank you for listening.